So I'm going to now introduce to you Gemma Hickey, who is our EPIC president. Gemma is a multi-award winning international author, human rights advocate, and global speaker from Newfoundland and Labrador, which has its own First Nation peoples, whose advocacy has made headlines worldwide. Their work has transformed Canada's legal landscape, advancing the rights, dignity, and equality of women, the LGBTQ2+ community.
And her and all of the lovely people here who are participating in making this event as successful as it's been, because this is the first time it's been done, and we're going to model this summit in the future. So some excellent work. Another round of applause, please, for. Now, I don't want to take too much time. I basically just want to talk about mobilization efforts, essentially. And I will refer a little bit to my past, but only to bring us here to the future on how to organize against this Goliath of an institution that we're up against. So, I'm not here to change anyone's minds. I'm not here to defend myself. In fact, what's good for you may not be good for me, and what's good for me may not be good for you, and that's okay. But what we can all agree on is that the institution of the church and how it doesn't protect children and vulnerable adults needs to change. So, I will refer to a theologian in my presentation, a female theologian, because as Marie had said in my bio, my academics, academically, I studied theologians and comparative religions and biblical languages in many ways to find translations to things. And but very seldom have I ever come across growing up or learning about my Catholic faith. I never knew any women. I never knew of any women scholars. I wasn't told that there were I wasn't told that there were any women scholars. And I didn't know there were more than 4 Gospels. I didn't know anything except what I was taught. And so, learning all those things strengthened me in my resolve to follow Jesus in terms of how I identify as an activist. And so, many of the theologians I've studied, some of my favorites actually, Hans Kuhn, Raymond Brown, all these guys. Actually, my new favorite Hans Zollner, is a theologian. Good guy.
Psychologist and pontifical.
Yeah, we worked with him, and we really like that guy.
You were with the IST?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I saw you in Rome.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
I hope we see each other again.
Yeah, this June I'll be there.
Excellent.
Facilitator.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Amazing. And so there's a lot of really amazing theologians, and that's great. But I didn't know any women who were theologians. I didn't even know women could be theologians. You know what I mean? So anyway, I'm just talking about opening our minds and hearts and that sort of thing. So I want to start off first with a trailer to a film that a colleague and I are working on together, entitled Road to Rome. And talking about lobbying efforts, I actually, over the years, I've been an advocate now for almost 30 years. And I've used a wide variety of techniques to make changes. And many of the changes that I've been a part of, people have told me that you'll never make that happen. That'll never be done. You're not going to make change. How can you change that law? You're not going to change that law. And I don't know about you, but when someone tells me I can't do something, I just got it in my head that, I'm a bit stubborn. Newfoundlanders are like that, Newfoundlanders. So it makes me work harder. And so, obviously many of us have been raised Catholic. I'm from a devout Irish Roman Catholic family. And we've all heard of Rome, the Pope and the Vatican, and there's always something over there. Never something that I ever thought I would get to. And, Newfoundland and Labrador has been, like everywhere else in the entire world, hit really hard with religious institutional abuse. In Labrador, we've had residential schools. In Newfoundland, there's been and priests in Labrador who've abused children and vulnerable adults, and also in Newfoundland, the same sort of thing. It's priests, orphanages. Belvedere Orphanage was run by nuns. Mount Cashel Orphanage was run by Christian brothers, and we've had many instances of sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional, psychological abuse, and let's not forget about Indigenous people, cultural abuse. So, all different layers, so many layers. And so, in fact, in many ways, Newfoundland and Labrador is ground zero when it comes to this type of abuse because it broke out early on and it erupted in the 80s, and then also it started erupting everywhere. So for me, the road to Rome starts at home. And so one of the things that I've used to lobby is walking, simple act of walking, movement, forward, symbolic. So this is a trailer from a film that I'm working on, and it's called Road to Rome. And I just want to play it before I go through some slides and talk a little bit more about it.
Permanently removed from office.
So today's another 20 kilometers. Keep going.
Oh my God, this is terrible. It's been grueling.
And then the trail turns right and climbs away from
Precisely. Now you're going to go to the monastery.
When I came forward with my story of abuse in 1990, it's still going on. I don't believe the children are any safer.
There's just only so much a survivor can handle.
So what is making the reason not worry?
I am so sorry that that happened to you.
We want it now. What do we want? Zero tolerance. When do we want it? Now. It was a freeing moment. It was like people heard what we had to say. There's still more work to be done, and there's still more steps to be made.
So, the arts, film, writing, all those things have been useful for me in lobbying governance and systems and these types of things. And, you know, like I said, I think there's the journey outside and there's the journey inside. And, you know, in particular now, I think it's important that we work together and find ways to work together. Find ways that we can actually meet in the middle. And so, Mary Daly is a feminist theologian. And I picked her mainly because I love reading her stuff. And she's so cool. And this quote of hers, courage is a habit. You become courageous by doing courageous acts. You know, I think that that's a really good quote because, you know, we have to practice courage. It doesn't come to us naturally because it's not easy. It's not easy to speak out, stand up, you know? And when I look around this room, I think, what's courage? And I'll tell you right now, like, Anne Barrett Doyle, that's courage. You know, that's courage right there. That woman, Catholic from Boston, Mary Daly, out of Boston, you know, as her family were going into church, she was so outraged by what happened in Boston, the Catholic Church, that she stood outside alone with a sign as people passed her by, alone. I mean, that's courage. That's courage. And I know what alone feels like. I know what that feels like. I know what it feels like to be alone, to be the only one speaking out about this. And I'm sure all of you do too, in some ways, in your own ways. And you know, Murray referenced Trump, and there's a lot of policies now that he's issuing these executive orders, one after the other, against people like me. And that's affecting how things are in Canada. It affected my travel into the U.S. this time around. And when I got my gender neutral passport, I was meeting with embassies as I was invited to speak there to talk about preventative measures, you know, safety protocols. Because in some places I could be put to death, I could be imprisoned, these types of things. But We have to have courage. And I think, you know, when I traveled abroad this time as a result of Trump's second presidency, my mother had said to me, you know, she begged me not to go. She begged me not to go. She was crying at the airport. And she said, please, please don't go, please. And I said, I gotta go, I gotta go. And the way I look at it is this, you know, what can people do to me that hasn't already been done? What can people do to me? You know, rape me? I've already been sexually assaulted. You're gonna do, hate me? You know, there's no amount of hate in this world that could take away from the hate that I've already inflicted on myself. So, I'm not afraid, because I faced my fears in that way. Standing up to the institution of the church especially, naming the priest, confronting that was one of those things for me. And so, even if I get turned away at the border, I know I've made it, because for me, every day above ground is a victory. And so, it doesn't matter to me so much if people accept me, as long as I accept me, you know? And I'm at that place now. And that was the longest and hardest road that I ever journeyed on. But I arrived. And so here I am, as a little kid, coming home from the hospital with my mother. I just referenced my mother, and she was so scared about me traveling this time around. And, you know, rightly so, because I have been warned since I've been here. And also before I came, and people had been wondering how I've been doing, but I'm here among some amazing people, and happy to be here on the campus. So I was born, assigned female, when I was a kid, when I was born. That's me there, Gemma, and me and my mother coming home from the hospital. Go to the next slide. And this is my first day at kindergarten. And of course, my Holy Communion, right there. And, you know, I was so happy to be a part of the church. I loved God so much. I wanted to be a priest as a kid. And I went to church every day. And that was one, I remember this day. It was one of the happiest days of my life. It was just around the same time that I shortly thereafter met the priest. We can go to the next slide. And so things are happening here for me now. Obviously, I didn't want to wear dresses. I didn't want to be like a girl. My mother and I had fights about it. It was difficult for me. I felt very alone. I had no language to describe myself. No understanding. And the church told me that I was wrong, evil, sick. Society, there wasn't any rights back then. Every right that I've had, I had to fight for. Every right that I've won. So, I actually went to see a conversion therapist. I talked to my doctor about some of the things that I was feeling and thinking. And I went to see a conversion therapist. He recommended me to see a therapist in his office. And that's what I did. And I was very unhappy at this time. And the priest was someone who I looked up to and admired. He was in my life. And he was very, very huge in my heart. And I adored him. And so, we can go to the next slide. So, I attempted suicide. I attempted suicide as a result of the conversion therapy not working. And I survived somehow. I was rushed to the hospital. I was 16 years old. I was in my last year of high school, Catholic high school. And I survived. And had I not been rushed to the hospital in time, I would not be here today. I would not have been a part of all the things that I've been a part of. I wouldn't have met so many wonderful people like yourselves. That's such a shame, really. But thankfully, I met a psychiatrist in hospital, and I talked to another priest, and both of them were kind to me and said that there was nothing wrong with me. And that was very affirming. Whether you agree with that or not, that's irrelevant to your story, but it's relevant to mine. And so, when my mother has said to me, please don't go, what if someone killed you? And again, it's like, I tried to take my own life. I tried to take my own life. And for me, if I didn't speak out, if I didn't put myself at risk, if I didn't go there, if I stopped trying, being, doing, then make any kind of change at all. So that's how, for me, even though I'm not involved with institutionalized religion anymore outside of working with people from within, that's how I see Jesus in terms of speaking out against government, speaking out against the church, dying for what he believed in, and these sorts of things really speak to me still. And so when I got out of hospital, I said to myself, I've got to help other people. I don't want kids to have to go through what I went through. And so that was when the activist in me was born. And shortly thereafter, when I went to university, I threw myself into advocacy, and I started lobbying. And at the time, there was no political will to, well, no one believed me that conversion therapy actually took place. There was no political will. And in order to mobilize and get government on side and get the public on side and these types of things, you actually need the political will. You need some kind of political will. So there was no political will because no one believed me it was actually happening. So over time, I threw myself into other movements within my community and built that up. So every single time I would do a media interview or a talk. So at this point, I was an advocate and I had a platform. Every time I did that, I would make a new connection. And I would make note of that connection. Or someone would see me on the media and they would get in touch with me. And I would make note of that. And then, slowly but surely, other survivors of conversion therapy started to come forward as well. Disclosed to me. And that it hadn't worked for them. And I'm not saying that maybe it will not, I'm just saying I'm talking about the people that I connect with and their experiences with conversion therapy. But for me, it almost cost me my life. So I met other people, and in terms of like advocacy work, it's about playing the long game and the short game. What can be achieved now and what can be achieved down the road. And so throwing myself into other human rights campaigns and building this political will, acceptance and understanding and education was paramount, really. And eventually, I formed a network, one person at a time. For me, with everything that I've been involved with, if one person listens, that's the start. One conversation leads to another. And every interaction, whether it's good or bad, and I've had a lot of bad ones, let me tell you. My life has been threatened, my property's been damaged, I've been spit on, I've seen the worst of people, but I've also seen the best of people. And so, one conversation leads to another. One interaction causes people to think differently, whether that's good or bad. And so, it's about building momentum, building political will, but also building connections and community. And so, that was about a 27-year fight. And eventually, conversion therapy was banned in 2021 in Canada, and I was up on Parliament Hill. It was a very full circle moment for me. So I just want to talk about, actually, can we go back to that slide? So in terms of mobilization efforts and walking, the idea for the pilgrimage came to me when in 2016 I walked across Newfoundland, and I had just founded an organization called Pathways, and again, there was a strong, even though there's been a lot of people who left the church as a result of sexual abuse, there's been a lot of people that have stayed, and still defended it, and to each their own. But I was thinking to myself, how am I going to get people on side here to be a part of this organization? And how am I going to get people to talk about this when it's such a controversial topic? People don't want to talk about their lives. They don't want to talk about things that have hurt them. They want to talk about damages that's been done. It's hard. It's hard to go there. It's hard to look at it. It's really, really hard. And in order to move forward, we need to take a good, hard look at the past. There's no going forward unless we look at the past and accept it and try to move on there. So I had this idea that I'd walk across Newfoundland. It's one of the hardest things I've ever done. It's a big island. I was really out of shape. We needed to train for it. And, I thought, I'm going to retrace the steps. Because in St. John's, there's these orphanages. Like I said, I mentioned Mount Cashel and Belvedere Orphanage. And these orphanages were filled with children that came from all over the island. And so my idea to walk across Newfoundland was that I was passing through these communities where all these people came from. And I wanted to connect with those communities. So the government sponsored my walk, and we had people in communities that wanted me to go there and talk about walking, talk about my experience as an abuse survivor. And I hadn't really come out publicly before, up until this point, because what happened to me was what happened to most people. I was abused, and then I tried to come forward. Everyone was saying, maybe it's not a good idea to go public. Everyone, I listened to the adults in my life. Before I knew what clericalism meant, before I knew what heteropatriarchy was, or any of those things, I knew that this priest shouldn't be on the altar. He should not have that level of power or that access to people. So it didn't seem like it was an option for me to go to criminal court. And so I was encouraged by the adults in my life, in particular the church, to settle. And, yeah, excuse my priest, it's a pro. I met him when I was 10, touching, and was grooming, started then, and just escalated. So, but again, when I came forward, I was 19, and I tried to do something about it, and I was shot down.
You did not transition yet.
No, I wasn't transitioning yet. I came later. And honestly, it took so much out of me to come forward because, I was not going to class. I was at university at this point. I was having a lot of issues and things were coming up for me. It was really difficult, but I couldn't keep it in anymore. So I confided in another priest, and he was my advocate. He helped me. He went with me to tell my parents, and then he said we have to tell the Archbishop, and it went from there. And so that's how I was able to come forward. Anyhow, what happened was I settled. All I wanted was for the church to pay for my therapy, and I wanted him to retire because, ironically, my conversion therapist, who I stopped seeing after, her daughter was abused by the same priest. And the only way I knew that was because my lawyer told me that I should go back to this therapist and get a letter to show that I was in therapy at the time. And I didn't want to go back to her, but I did what he told me to do. I went back to her, I told her what happened. She was very Catholic, and I knew that there was a connection through the Catholic community. And she said, I'll give you a letter right away. He abused my daughter too. So I knew, usually when there's one, there's more, that kind of thing, but I was even more determined than to get him off the altar. And so, long story short, he was removed for a time. But then, not very long later, he was assigned to another parish just up the road from my house. And years after that, another parish, until he retired again, later, many, many years later. I tried to do what I could at the time to actually remove him, but no one listened. And so did the other priest. And it was like I hit this wall with the bishops and the institution. We've all been there in some way or another. And I couldn't understand. I couldn't understand how this man was able to be back on the altar. And it all comes back to this canon law. It comes back to no mechanism in place for this sort of thing. And the church, shapeshifts really between this global church and then this tiny sovereign entity. And it's got, it's really not taking responsibility in the way that we need. And it's not just survivors who are suffering, it's parishioners. Back home, archdiocese are going bankrupt. Parishioners who built these churches, their lives have been, in this church, and they're losing their churches. We're paying the price for the sins of the fathers, and you know something? It's not right. And you know who else is being hurt too? Are these good nuns and brothers and priests that I know. They're also being affected, not only in their reputations, but also their living situations. Everything was up in the air because they were selling properties. You know? And then when I go to the Vatican, I see all this wealth, and it just breaks my heart because there's so much wealth, and so many people suffering, especially my home. You know, and it's almost like the Archdiocese, they don't even think twice about going to court. You know, they go to court and they challenge us and they pay lawyers big bucks. And you know, for me, I thought a lot about going to court. And I don't know about you, but for me, like, I think about my community and how we're a wounded province and how it affects them. You know, not just me individually, but the whole of us. You know, so in so many ways, for me, it feels like they've just lost their way in terms of how to protect the vulnerable. So I needed to get people engaged in this topic back home, you know, in order to take this on. And anyway, walking was one of those ways. Walking. And you know, to answer your question, I hadn't transitioned yet. I hadn't even really thought. I came out as a lesbian, and because there was no word for transgender at the time, you know, there was no word for any of that for me. I never had any language around that.
If you don't mind, you transition, was it at the effect of what you have experienced?
No, nothing. I think
Gemma,
that
can you
I think that
repeat
what
the
happened.
questions that Lisa's asking?
Well, she asked if if transitioning had anything to do with basically what happened. And no, I will tell you that I've always felt this way, even since I was so very small. I've always felt this way. I just didn't have language for it. But I will say that the sexual abuse, this priest, compounded my gender dysphoria. It's a term for it. Most people know it's just, you know, the dysphoria of feeling like you're in some wrong body, these types of things. And you know, there were so many layers to this type of abuse. And it was on the walk, actually. One night I was walking, I had no skin on my feet. The blisters were, there was no skin on my feet. I was walking so much, and I wrapped my feet up with duct tape. And I got an allergic reaction. I had an allergic reaction to the glue in the tape. And then my legs swelled. And I had to make this deadline because I had all these people waiting for me. It was on schedule. You know, I had to be on schedule. And anyhow, I was in the camper one night. We had a camper at the provincial parks because the government sponsored a walk. And my uncle filled a tiny bathtub in the camper with ice water so they could soothe the chafing, because my legs had swollen and I had my thighs. I had no skin on my thighs when they were really raw. I was in the bathtub in this fetal position, and because it was so small, and I looked down between my legs, and it was like my body had a memory, and I remembered that I was hurt there, and then I thought to myself, I was like, this is what does this mean? I'm transgender. And I was in my late 30s at the time, and then it hit me all of a sudden that, you know, there were so many layers. And I had done a lot of therapy at that point, because the therapy that the church was paying for, I used. I was committed to the therapy. I really was, and it worked in lots of ways. And anyway, it really brought me back to myself in a way that I needed, you know. And so I remember the next day there was this like rainstorm, and Newfoundland weather was just unpredictable. And anyway, I was walking against the wind, and I felt like I was getting punched in the face. The wind and the rain was so strong, and I kept walking and walking and walking, and all of a sudden the sky cleared. It was just like, it was as if I walked into this beautiful picture. And the sun was shining, there was a valley, there was a rainbow, and I sang out my name, and the echo came back to me, and I said, I don't want to change my name. I'm Gemma. I'm going to change the law instead. Because at that point I had lived my life for 36 years as a woman. I was abused as a woman, socialized to be a woman. And, you know, that meant that I was reluctant to speak out. You know, it meant that in some ways I held things in, didn't talk about it. And so, you know, all that lived experience I had, I didn't want to give up. I didn't want to give up. I didn't want to let that go. I didn't want to do that. No, that's okay for some people. Some people do that, and that's okay. You know? And for me, I wanted to hold on to that. And it was only in going back there and realizing that I was able to love that little girl in myself, that part of her, part of me, part of her, I hated. And I was able to truly embrace abuse, truly embrace it in a way that I needed in order to get over it, in order to kind of move forward. And it was an incredible experience. So basically, you know, in terms of the abuse, there's all kinds of different things that we could talk about, but you know, walking was one of them. I only have a few members of Mecca. Tim Law right there, our little buddy Karen from Uganda, and it was a successful event. Next one. And first ever meeting with the dicastery and legislative texts to talk about canon law revisions. Next. And this is another Mary Daly quote. The message is risk, really risk, be yourself, create. So mobilization efforts, using the arts, using media, walking, whatever we can do, taking symbolism from things that meant something to me as a child and as an adult, and utilizing that into turning the script, flipping the script, you know, because I can still identify with the cross, I can still identify with aspects of my Catholic faith that were once a part of my everyday living. And also, again with arts, I'll end now, but music. Music was another way to engage people, to get them on side. And so I'm about to show you a video now that a famous Canadian singer wrote with me and prepared. And in the music video are famous Canadians who were standing up for our cause. And so that was one of the ways that I launched Pathways through the music video and the walk. So we'll just play it and then I'm done. We can chat later. Thank you.
Blinding storm goes spread by shore, holding fast while billows roar, seeking shelter from the storm. The red road, the pathway, leading through the darkest night, trying to find a guiding light. Take what's wrong and make it right. Finally say. Goodbye to fear, goodbye to shame.